Hey everybody, how's it going? Reminder, hopefully this is our next to last week of online only. Hopefully by the first Sunday in February, we're going to be able to go online and on campus live. So keep your fingers crossed and keep praying. Also a reminder, we've got some great stuff available for you to do with your kids on Sundays or during the week. Make sure you check all that out. But anyway, we are today finishing up our series called Goals. And the Goals series is interesting because one of the things we pointed out at the very beginning was how our goals can get really messed up if, the world goes crazy like it did in 2020. What if it does something like that again in 2021? And it's possible. What will happen to our goals? How do we set goals that can survive when the world goes crazy? And so we started out looking at a guy named Hezekiah, and we said there were four things that he did that it made it so that his goals worked out so that he could be successful. One was he kept in touch with God's principles and God's priorities. He lived in God's presence, and then he worked hard. And so we've already talked about the first three of those. Now let's talk about working hard. And if we're going to talk about working hard and being successful while working hard, there's one guy in the Bible that kind of just stands out as the dude. And his name's Nehemiah. And Nehemiah lived in an upside down time in the history of Judaism and history of the nation of Israel. The world was upside down for him. It had been upside down for a while because he was finishing up. He came along at the very end of what's called the exile. And what had happened was the nation of Israel had been just ticking God off on a continuous basis for so long, he finally put him in a 70-year timeout. You heard that right, 70-year timeout. They were in timeout called exile, where a nation came in and actually took almost all the people and moved them to another nation and made them live there. It took so long that the nation that originally took them captive got taken over by another nation about halfway through the process, and the other nation finished the exile. But finally, God felt they'd learned their lesson, and so he started sending them back. But not everybody left at once. A lot of people, there was a good number that went back to the Holy Land, but a lot of them stayed in exile because they lived there for them their entire lives. They had careers going, they had lives, and so they stayed. And Nehemiah was one of those who stayed. And Nehemiah probably stayed because he had a really good career going. He had a good life. He was what's known as the cupbearer to the king. And that sounds like he's in food services. But what it really means is he's like beside the king all the time. He is to make sure that no food, that's one of his biggest responsibilities, is to make sure no poison gets to the king. That's cupbearer. He is in charge of making sure that everything gets to the king is safe, which means the king trusted him implicitly. He's a very, very powerful man with free access to the king. And so in Nehemiah chapter 1, the book starts and Nehemiah is about to get a report on what's going on with the ones who have stayed behind, who have gone on to the nation of Israel, who've returned from the exile. And it says in chapter 1, the words of Nehemiah, the son of Hakaliah, in the month of Kislev in the 20th year, while I was in the citadel of Susa, when I was in the castle where the king lives, and I live, okay? Hanani, one of my brothers, came from Judah with some other men, and I questioned them about the Jewish remnant that had survived the exile, and also about Jerusalem. So how are things going for the ones who went back? Because he's sort of Jewish still, right? So they said to me, those who survived the exile and are back in the province are in great trouble and disgrace. The wall of Jerusalem is broken down and its gates have been burned with fire. In other words, they're back in Israel, but nothing's going well. Okay, because you needed a wall for defense. It's a shambles. And then in verse 4 it says, when I heard these things, I sat down and wept. And when he sat down and wept, something changed in life. Something big happened to impact him in a major, major way. And what happened was this. Prior to hearing this, he was sort of Jewish. Okay, he was sort of committed. But he had his priorities and God's priorities, and they didn't exactly match. He was what we would call like a part-time Christian. He was a part-time Jew. And so when that happened, though, he realized he needed to make God's priorities his priorities. And there's a really good reason to, and I'm not just talking about this because, oh yeah, you need to be a really committed Christian. That's not why I'm saying this. I'm saying this because we talk a lot about some people who waste their lives on things that don't matter. I know people who they're spending their entire lives on things that won't amount to a hill of beans. But even more people than those who are spending their lives on things that don't matter are the ones who are squandering their lives on things that don't matter much. They're doing things that they're sort of important. They're spending their entire lives on things that are sort of important. And I think that's tragic, and I think that's sad. And I know so many people who are Christians, who are three-quarter Christian or half Christian, and they're spending their lives on things that sort of matter. Jesus in Matthew chapter 6 said to store your treasures in heaven. Store your treasures in heaven, where moth and rust cannot destroy and where thieves do not break in and steal. And for us, there's two things that are so crucial if you're going to be doing things that really matter and not the things that either don't matter or don't matter much. And that's to focus on one or both of two things. And those are the least and the lost. The Bible's very clear that God is very, very concerned with the people who are hurting, the people who do not have power, the least. He says we are supposed to take whatever power we get to help those who don't have it. It is so clear in the Bible. I cannot believe some Christians argue with me about that. And it just tells me they've never read the book. Okay, that's all it means. You've not read the book and you've never internalized it if you don't think helping the least is a crucial part of what God says. But just as important is we're supposed to be helping the lost, the people who don't have a relationship with Christ. And realistically, in this world, the only way you can effectively reach the lost is to help the least. And the only way you can truly help the least is to be helping them not become lost. So it's helping the least and reaching the lost. That's what it matters. If you're not doing that, it means you're doing things that don't matter that much. Okay? If you're not helping people grow into all God created them to be, you're doing things that are not helping that much. And I'm sorry if I'm being a little harsh, but it's a strong thing. It's the beginning of the year. It's time to get our commitments in order. Paul talks about it in 1 Corinthians chapter 3. And he talks about how if you take everything a person does throughout their life and you were transform it into building materials, it's a cool image. You take everything you've done, and at the end, when you get to heaven, it's like it's being transformed into building materials, and we kind of turn into the three little pigs. And some of us are building houses out of straw, and a few out of sticks, and hardly any Christians are building their house for eternity out of brick, out of something that is solid. And it's like you need to make sure that your life, and I'm not saying you have to quit your job and move to the mission field, but where you are you doing things that really matter? And what happened with Nehemiah was he realized he had an important job and he had a big power, but he wasn't doing things that matter. And so he changed his priorities to line up with God's. And when he did that, he exchanged his path for God's. And we need to do that too. We need to exchange our path for God's path, for his path. In chapter 4, the next couple of things that happens, Nehemiah recognizes that something's going on. And so he goes to see the king, okay? And it says, I mourned and fasted and prayed before the God of heaven. Then I said, Lord, the God of heaven, the great and awesome God who keeps his covenant of love with those who love him and keep his commandments. So he sits down and he starts praying to God. God, I need to get my path and your path on the same page. So he's mourning and he's fasting and he's praying. And in that prayer, he says, the Lord God of heaven, the great and awesome God. And this line is really actually very important. It doesn't sound big, but it's huge. It says, who keeps his covenant of love with those who love him and keep his commandments. And what he's doing here is he is actually quoting a piece of Exodus chapter 20, verse 6. Exodus is the second book in the Bible. And if you're a Bible person, you may have caught Exodus 20. That's familiar. Yeah, that's the 10 Commandments. And in the very beginning of the 10 Commandments, God says something very similar. And this is the most referenced verse in the entire Hebrew Bible. And what he's doing is, see, in Exodus 20, what's happening is the people of Israel have been led out of slavery in Egypt. They've come out across the Red Sea. They've gone into the wilderness to Mount Sinai. And God is giving them the covenant, the laws for their new nation, which will be a nation that serves God, a nation that advances God's principles on earth. Matter of fact, the nation through which God will bring about redemption. Remember that the whole course of history is creation. God creates the heavens and the earth. Humanity falls, creation fall, redemption, restoration. That redemption comes, as you know, through Jesus Christ, who came, lived a perfect life, the Son of God, lived a perfect life, died and rose again so that we could have new life. And then he began the process there, a process he'll continue later, of completely restoring his creation. And that story was told for a good while through the nation of Israel. And when Nehemiah gets to this point and he prays that little piece of a prayer, what he's saying is, I want to tie into the nation of Israel, the kingdom of God and his work on earth. I want to make God's path my path. And so he finishes, and here's how he keeps praying. He's talking to God. He says, God, let your ear be attentive and your eyes open to hear the prayer of your servant is praying before you day and night for your servants, the people of Israel. Now listen, there's going to be a pronoun shift. He says, I confess the sins we Israelites, including myself and my father's family, have committed against you. We have acted very wickedly toward you. We have not obeyed the commands, decrees, and laws you gave your servant Moses. And an awful lot of us are I. Our faith is about I. My faith is about me. And for it to be powerful, for it to have the full impact it has to have, for me to get on the path, it has to shift from being about me to being about us. The pronoun has to shift from I to we. I am part of God's work. I am part of God's kingdom. I am part of what God is trying to accomplish through his work on earth. And I am going to step into God's path. And that's what Nehemiah does. Nehemiah does it, and it's so cool because right there, when those pronouns shift from me, to us, to we, that is powerful. And let me tell you something, that takes faith. It takes a lot of trust in God. And let me tell you something about that faith. That faith includes trusting God to show you what you can do, for God to show you that there are things you can do, and believing that he can do it through you, that God can do things that matter through you. Oswald Chambers puts it this way: get into the habit of putting God first and calculating with him in view. Putting God first and calculating everything with the fact that he is in there, he is working with you, he is working for you. It is not just you alone. You are working with and for God. Now let's keep reading in verse 11 with his prayer. Watch how his prayer goes. He says in verse 11, Lord, let your ear be attentive to the prayer of this your servant, and to the prayer of your servants who delight in revering your name. Give your servant success today by granting him favor in the presence of this man. And you're going, what man? Well, what was Nehemiah's job? He was cupbearer to the king. And he realized something. If I'm going to get on God's path, and I'm going to do things that actually matter, I need to take advantage of what I have. And so what he did was what we need to do, which is we need to then, once we're on the right path, assess your resources. Nehemiah said, I've got a resource with the king. I can walk into the king and say anything to him as long as it's not derogatory, and I can say anything. So he goes to the king, and watch this. This is really cool. In chapter 2, verses 7 and 8. He says, if it pleases the king, may I have letters to the governors of Trans-Euphrates. In other words, I'm going to pass through some countries as I'm getting from here where the exile is over to Jerusalem. I'll pass through some places. Can I get some letters so that they will provide me safe conduct until I arrive in Judah? Now that's just common sense. King, would you give me some letters so that the people know that I'm okay and they won't kill me while I'm traveling? That seems perfectly safe. But he's not done yet. He knows he's built up resources with the king, so he keeps asking. I have a letter to Asaph, the keeper of the royal park, so he will give me timber. Well, if I'm going to rebuild a wall, I'm going to need wood. So would you give me a letter so he'll give me wood? Because if you write the letter, he will. But he's not done yet. To give me timber to make beams for the gates of the citadel by the temple and for the city wall and for the residence I will occupy. I need a place to live too. Could you have him give me wood for that too? Okay? He is assessing and taking advantage of his resources. And it says, and because the gracious hand of my God was on me, the king granted my requests. One of the things we tend not to do, we believe, so many people believe, if they're going to start serving God and doing things that matter, that suddenly everything in their lives has to change. That God has to do brand new things. And a lot of times God's already giving you and already has given you the things that you need. One of my favorite just a little phrase out of the Bible is in Exodus chapter 4, well before the 10 Commandments, where God is calling Moses to go out and do the work. And God calls Moses, and Moses has been saying, I don't think it's a good idea. He's been whining and everything else. In chapter 4, Moses is just about ready to do it, but he's still got one more concern. And he says in chapter 4, verses 1 and 2, Moses protested again, what if they won't believe me? What if I go to the Israelites and they don't believe that you sent me? Okay? What if they won't believe me or listen to me? What if they say, the Lord never appeared to you? And the Lord said to him, and this is an awesome little line, what's that in your hand? What's that you already have? Now, Moses has been working as a shepherd for years while he's been away from, before he goes back in to rescue his people. He's been working as a shepherd. So what do you think's in his hand? Yeah, a stick. He's got a stick. Because we talked about last week, every shepherd has to carry a stick. He's got a shepherd's staff in his hand. He's got, and that's what Moses says, a shepherd's staff. That's what I got. I got a stick. God says, okay, throw that thing down. So Moses throws it down, and it turns into a snake. And God says, okay, reach down and grab the snake by the tail. Now, I'm not sure how you grab a snake by the tail, because best I can see, a snake is nothing but tail, but God says, grab it by the tail. So he reaches down and grabs it, and when he grabs it, it turns back into a stick. And he says, I'll use that. And so Moses goes to the people, the Israelites, the Jews, and he goes to them and says, God has sent me to set us free. And they say, you're just making it up. And he goes, see my stick? And he throws his stick down, it turns into a snake. And then he reaches down and grabs the snake, and it turns back into a stick. And he goes before Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, and he says, let my people go. And Pharaoh says, you're just an idiot. And he says, see my stick? And he throws the stick down, it turns into a snake. And they make some other snakes, and then his snake eats their snakes, and then he grabs the stick and it turns back into a snake. And it turns back into a stick. And then Pharaoh fights with him and everything else, says, okay, and he takes his stick and he goes out to the river Nile. And he uses his stick, and God uses that stick to perform the miracle of turning the water into blood in the Nile River. And there are more and more miracles and more plagues. And almost every time, the stick has something to do with it. That stick, the thing that Moses had in his hand, the thing he found lying in the woods somewhere, the thing he just found was his stick. It's what he had. And then Pharaoh lets the people go, and they're marching out of Egypt, and they get partway out of Egypt, just barely out of Egypt. Pharaoh changes his mind, sends the army after him. They catch him at the Red Sea, and the Israelites are stuck between the Red Sea and the Egyptian army. And God says, okay, Moses, raise your staff. And Moses raises his staff, and the sea parts, and they walk through on dry land, and he lowers his stick, and the sea comes back together, and the Egyptian army is destroyed. And then a few years later, they're having a battle, and it's a tough battle against a really strong opponent. And Moses goes out to pray for his people, and as he prays, he raises his stick. When he raises the stick, they win. And when he lowers the stick and stops praying, they lose. And so two of his most trusted advisors come up beside him and put a chair, something for him to sit on beside him. And then the two of them hold up his arms, and they continue to hold up the stick. And as they hold up the stick, they win the battle. What's that you have in your hand? God wants to use what he's already given you. That's where he starts. There's only one miracle that's told in all four Gospels except for the resurrection. And that miracle is the feeding of the 5,000. And in the feeding of the 5,000, in every case, there's a boy. Everyone it tells it remembers the little boy. And the fact that they found they had little Lunchables the kid brought from home. 5 loaves and 2 fish. We hear loaves. We hear something big. It was a little tiny. It was like it was a good sized roll. That's what it was. He had 5 loaves, 2 fish. God said, that's enough. That's what you have in your hand. I can take that and I can use it. Nehemiah's biggest resource is his relationship to the king. What is your biggest resource? What do you have in your hand? Start with your personal resources. Don't say, God, make me into somebody else. Don't say, God, give me a whole bunch more stuff. Take what God has given you and use it. Start with your personal resources. And start with the resources you have inside of you, not just the stuff you have around me. Don't be afraid to use what God's given you as far as money, but also remember your talents and your gifts and your passions, because God has placed your calling in the midst of your gifts, talents, and passions. God's not going to give you brand new gifts, talents, and passions almost hardly ever to serve him, but you have a calling from God, and it is found in the midst of that. Matter of fact, following the path laid out by your gifts, talents, and passions will lead you to God's calling. That's where it's found. That's where I found the gifting that I have, the talents, the calling that I have. I could always talk. And God took that and put in a spiritual giftedness of teaching. And then he gave me a passion to watch lives changed. And boom, there it is. There's my calling. And your calling probably won't be a full-time job, but it'll be where God takes your gifts and talents and passions and does all kinds of cool things through them. So assess your resources, but don't just assess your resources. When Nehemiah gets to Jerusalem, the first thing he does when he gets there, by night, he says in chapter 2, verse 13, by night I went out through the valley gate toward the jackal well and the dung gate, examining the walls of Jerusalem, which had been broken down, and its gates, which had been destroyed by fire. He doesn't just assess and utilize his resources, he also assesses his obstacles. So assess your resources and your obstacles. What is in the way? What are the problems? Okay? Because here's where something very important. When you start looking at the problems, Nehemiah goes out and he looks at everything that's wrong and he realizes, I can't fix this. I'm not capable of doing this. See, a lot of times you'll look and you'll find something where your gifts, talents, and passions are colliding, and they're colliding in something that is bigger than you are. Matter of fact, almost always they're going to be colliding in something that is bigger than you are. So the next thing he does in chapter 2, verse 17, is he goes to the leaders of Jerusalem and he says, I said to them, you see the trouble we are in. Jerusalem lies in ruins and its gates have been burned with fire. Come, let us rebuild the wall of Jerusalem and we will no longer be in disgrace. So after you assess your resources and your obstacles, now you're in a position to do the next thing, which is exactly the opposite of what we think we're supposed to do. But what he does is what we're supposed to do, which is either form a team or join one. We all think we're Bruce Willis in Nakatomi Tower. We think our job is to be diehard, be the lone wolf solving. Nothing that really happens that matters gets done by one person. It is next to never does a single individual do anything that matters. The most prominent and most influential Christian probably in the whole 20th century was Billy Graham. And the first thing Billy Graham did when he got to work on his outreach ministry and what he did with his evangelism was he formed a team, and he got a bunch of guys and gals around him who he could count on, who he could trust, and he was the face, and they took care of everything else. If you're going to do that, you need to be either form a team or join a team. Let me give you how you do that. Okay? Find something to do. You're like, I don't know what I should do. Well, tell you what, just a couple of weeks, we're going to go back to live on-campus services, and it takes a lot of people to make that happen. Do something. Get in there, join a team. Say, but Steve, I'm just not into kids. Matter of fact, I'm not any good with kids. Okay. You know what? We have people who work in our children's ministry who are very productive, and Leslie's going to kill me for this. We have people who are very productive working for our children's ministry who don't like kids. Now, before you rush and don't take your kids back there, we just don't have them teach kids. But there's a lot of stuff that needs done to get ready every Sunday. Somebody has to get the materials ready. Somebody has to get the materials into the right place. Somebody else to count the kids. They have to be good at math, not kids. Somebody has to make sure there's somebody in every slot every week. You don't have to be good with kids to do that. You have to be good at administration. You might be good at administration and not really good with kids. And we can find a place for you. You might be in First Impressions, might be a place where you can serve in First Impressions, and you can get out there and you can work with them. You say, but I'm not even all that friendly. Well, thankfully, right now, a lot of our people are wearing masks, so nobody can tell you're not friendly. But even after that, again, even if you're not the person who stands at the door and shakes hands, you can, or waves, fist bumps, you can be the person who organizes it. You can be a person who arranges it, who does the training. There are so many things that need done that you can, it's weird, but you can find something that takes part of your gifts, talents, and passions every Sunday at our church. Even if you're just online, even if you're an online only person, it takes hosts. There are lots of things that we need to have done that are online only. Just contact us, let us know. We'd be glad to start plugging you in. But I'll tell you, your calling may not be on Sunday morning. Most people's not. But if you start working there, you start making connections, you start making friends, and next thing you know, you'll start seeing something that we're doing that's not a Sunday morning thing that really matches your passions, and you start working on that, and you work your way into your calling. Because it's not about one person doing everything. I don't know if I'm in the middle, but I think I'm close to in the middle of a case like that in my own personal life. Because during this whole pandemic thing, a lot of time to analyze. And, and I'm not 24 anymore. So I'm thinking, significance really matters even more than ever for me. And one of the things, I used to think it would be cool to teach in a seminary where I'm training pastors. And then, as I thought and prayed about it over the years, I've noticed something. There's a tool called Operation World, and if you don't know Operation World, I'd encourage you to really click in and connect with it. Operation World is a tool, and it's produced by a group that studies missions worldwide. Okay, and you can get a book to use the book if you like books. You can get an app. They've got an app that goes on your device. They've got a website, and on it they go through every country on earth in a year. So basically, it's give or take, it's a country per day for the entire year because there's a lot of countries. Big countries get multiple days, that kind of thing. And I noticed something just jumped out at me as I went through it over a number of years. There are countries where the gospel's struggling. There are countries where they're not reaching a lot of people. There are countries where they're hardly reaching anybody because of government oppression or all kind of religious oppression of some kind. But there are countries, especially in South America and in sub-Saharan Africa, where the church is exploding, where people are coming to Christ at amazing rates. And every time I come to one of those countries, as I'm reading through this Operation World and going through it, it says that one of the biggest needs is people to train pastors. I'm going, wait a second. They have a need for people to train pastors to read and understand the Bible. I have a passion for reading and understanding the Bible. Is it possible that my passion and my gifts and my talents could combine to help me do that? Not saying leave Spout Springs to do it, but do it as something I do on the side or in conjunction with Spout Springs Church, as we have a ministry that trains pastors all over the world. And I'm frustrated because I'm going, yeah, but I mean, I'd have to set up a school. I'm going to all these things. And I'm talking to a friend of mine, and he's kind of an administrative kind of guy for pastors. And I'm talking to him about that. He knows me really well. He's gone through my strengths with me. And he goes, Steve, no. I go, what? He goes, you are a gifted Bible teacher, but your gift is not in setting things up and making them run. That's not what you do. You surround yourself with a team, and the team takes care of all that stuff, which is how we do it at Spout Springs, and that opens the door for you to do your leading and your teaching. And so and then he kind of buys into it. And he's like, so what we need to do, change from I to we, what we need to do is connect you with ministries, connect you with people who are already doing the training. And so you can go there sometimes during the year. You can make videos for them. You can do online things for them so that you can train pastors, but let other people do it. You show up and teach because that's what you do. I'm like, that'd be cool. That'd be really cool. So I join you. Ask you to join me in praying for that, because I really would love for, there's a potential opportunity coming up pretty soon for a seminary, and I won't name the country. The country has a strong church, but it's next to some countries that some of you folks have visited, if you know what I mean. Visited on work. Okay? It's not all that legal to be a Christian, or it's persecuted or negatives. And pastors from those countries will sneak across the border to attend seminary there. I'm going, wouldn't it be awesome if God would open the door so that Spout Springs Church could help with them to send me over to teach a week or two a year there so that they could then sneak back across the border and spread the gospel where our people have been trying to make change happen for years now? Wouldn't it be cool if I could be doing videos and we could be doing videos to send to wouldn't that be some cool stuff? But I'm never going to do that by myself. I either need to form a team or join one. And don't forget, that's a big part of it. It's not about you getting everything done. It's about you doing your part while God gets everything done through you and the team he places you on. Okay? And then the last piece, after your resources and your obstacles, and you've joined a team or formed one, is, and this is basic, get to work. Get to work. One of my favorite stories about Paul. Paul is going through what's now Turkey, Asia Minor, and he's trying to tell people about Jesus, and God won't let him. Every time he tries to go somewhere where he's never been to tell people about Jesus, God says no. The Spirit just says, nah, don't do that. Paul's frustrated. He gets all the way. He starts at one end of Turkey. He works his way all the way to the other end, which is where the Mediterranean Sea is. So he's done. And then he gets a dream one night of a guy from Macedonia. And Macedonia is Greece, and it's just across the channel there. And so Paul gets up the next morning and rents a boat. I mean, that's it. He doesn't, a lot of times we're like, well, I think I want to do this. I'm going to spend 3 years thinking about it. No. Now, it may be your work, maybe getting to work, maybe getting training, getting started on the training you need. But get to work, do something, get off your butt. I've seen so many people who tell me they want to do stuff in ministry, and sometimes I want to be a pastor, I want to be a, and when you try to give them a job, and they're like, I don't know, I'm not. Do something. I think I've told you guys this. I have taught every age group. I have been in my Christian life, and I have been an assistant nursery supervisor. They left me with small children, very small children. It did not go well, but they did. I have tried to teach 5-year-olds, junior high, middle school, high school, seniors, people over the age of 80. I've taught everything. And so do something, and then you'll find your sweet spot. So get to work, but by the way, expect opposition. Nehemiah is chapter 4. Verses 7 to 9, when Sanballat, Tobiah, the Arabs, and the Ammonites, all the people around there who were opposed, and the people of Ashdod heard the repairs to Jerusalem's walls were going ahead and that the gaps were being closed, they were very angry. There are people who don't want you to accomplish things for God, and there are just forces that don't want you to accomplish things for God, and there are voices inside of you that don't think you should accomplish things for God or don't think you can. So expect opposition. Okay? They were very angry. Verse 8 says, they all plotted together to come and fight against Jerusalem and stir up troubles against it. But we prayed to our God and posted a guard day and night to meet this threat. They were all upset. We posted a guard and kept working. There's one part in Nehemiah where they actually talk about how they got like a trowel to work with the bricks in one hand and a sword in the other. They keep working and expect opposition. And so Nehemiah does all the things we've talked about. He assesses his resources. He assesses the obstacles. He gets his team together. He gets to work. And then Nehemiah chapter 6, verses 15 and 16. Here's how the story kind of ends. So on October 2nd, the wall was finished. Just 52 days after we had begun. 52 days. They got it done. Because they did it right. They did it in God's power. They did it God's way. And so here's my question. Are you doing things that matter? Are you doing things that sort of matter or things that really matter? Well, it's time to do something. Don't waste your life doing things that don't matter, and don't squander your lives on things that don't matter much. Get your life lined up with God. Get your path lined up with God's path and your priorities lined up with God's priorities. Start seeing what it is. Where is it you think God would want to use you? And step into the water. Try something. It doesn't have to be major and adventurous. I mean, seriously, working with first impressions at our church is not the most adventurous thing a person can do. I know it can be scary, but it's not like you're not walking a tightrope over Niagara Falls here. This is something saying, hey, I want to help with the children's ministry. I don't want to teach, but I want to help with children's ministry. That's not super scary. I want to be a host online for one of the services on one of the different platforms that we use. I want to be a person who's in there checking on people and asking them questions. I want to be the person who's there if they want to unpack a blue bag. Find something to do and do it. God blesses those who work their butts off for Him. Bottom line. Now, you might be listening today and you don't have that relationship with Christ that we're talking about. You've never accepted what Jesus did for you on the cross. And if you'd like to talk to somebody about that, about a God who doesn't want you to just go to heaven when you die, but a God who wants you to have all of a great life now. John 10:10, I've come that you may have life and life to the full. If you want to do that, okay, then if you want to know about that, if you're in one of the chat rooms, there should be somebody there who's a host and you can sort of raise your hand. But if you're watching later, not live, or if you're just not sure you want to do that, there's a way we have online for you to kind of check it out. And we're going to put the link up there. And it's going to be a weird looking link, but it's a link to our blue bag online. You know, at our church services, when we're on campus, we say you can pick up a blue bag and somebody will unpack it with you. And if you've ever wondered what's in the blue bag, you can go to this site right here. Just type that out exactly. And if you go there, it'll show you and walk you through that blue bag. And then if you want to talk to somebody, there'll be a link on how to talk to somebody. Or if you'd like to just talk to me, you can email me, steve@spoutsprings.org, and we help you get connected and help you connect with somebody who wants to give you a blue bag. If you need to be baptized to announce to the world you're a follower of Christ, you can do that. Just email baptism@spoutsprings.org. If you'd like to have what we call an orientation chat, you'd like to talk about becoming part of our church, becoming part of our family, helping become the person God created you to be so you can do all the things He created you to do and do it with us so that we're working together to accomplish great things for God. Just email me, steve@spoutsprings.org. We can set up something live. We can set up something on Zoom or we on the telephone. We can do that and get you started in that process. Okay? I hope you're ready to do something. I hope you're ready to do something that matters. Can I pray for all of us? Father, I pray you help us to step into your plan. Help us to be ready to get busy, to do things that really matter. And Father, I also want to take just a second and pray. We've got people who are deployed, who are far from home, and we pray you keep them safe, bring them home soon. We got people that are long-term temporary duty, keep them safe as well. Be with the families that are here. And Father, help us never to settle for doing for things that only matter a little. Help us to always do things that matter a lot for you. And it's in Jesus' name I pray. Amen.